Hello and welcome to Pin Cut Sew. I have the most fun video to film for you today. This is the third kind of in a series about this quilt. I've mostly finished it. I lost steam on finishing hand stitching the binding last night, but I'm gonna finish it before I post this video, so I will show you the finished quilt in the end. But in the last section of this, or in the last video about this quilt, I asked you for your quilting FAQs. There are a few questions that I get pretty repeatedly about quilting, some basic things. And so I thought I'd open it up to those questions you have. But I got some of the best questions. Some questions I was not expecting, but I'm happy to answer. A few that I don't know the answer to, and I'll just be honest about them. And so I'm gonna jump into that today. I'm Nikki, this is Pin Cut Sew. Thank you for joining me, so glad you're here. I love to talk about quilting, and I'm very excited to get to these frequently asked questions. Maybe some that are less frequently asked, but maybe you have these struggles too and you've just never thought to ask it. The first question I want to answer though is about these dinosaur dolls. These were in the background of the last video about this quilt that I made, and I forgot to even tell you about this pattern. And I got so many questions about them. Tell us about the dinosaur dolls. So these are one of the newest patterns in my shop, so I'll link you to it. Little dinosaur with shorts or a skirt, bow tie and hair bow. I think they're so cute. So when I asked what animal doll I should make next, dinosaur was the top answer. So that's why I made the dinosaur. I'm currently working on a unicorn and horse pattern, so stay tuned for that. But I'll put the link to these little dolls patterns, or to the pattern for these little dolls, in the description below. Okay, moving on to actual quilting questions. I printed them all out, see? I don't think I missed any. Sorry if I did, you can leave it in the comments and maybe I'll make a part 2. But I'm first going to address the questions about needles and stitch length. These are probably the questions I get about quilting the most often. What needle do you use? How long is your stitch length? And so I just use a regular size 80 needle. I use Schmetz brand. I've had good success with those. A quilt quilts up just fine with a size 80. I used to use a semi-industrial FAF and that only held size 90 needles, so that's also fine. I do recommend you put in a new needle, and that if it's a large quilt, you change it halfway through and get all the dust out of your machine, because quilting is a fuzzy endeavor. So you might notice that there's a lot of fuzz and stuff as you go, and that's because you're dealing with batting and cotton. So it's important that it be new and that you maybe change it and clean the fuzz out of your machine frequently. Okay, and then as for stitch length, when I'm piecing the quilt, you usually want a little bit of a smaller stitch length, so I lower it to like 2.5 maybe. No, 2.5 is pretty general. Like 2 or 2.2 maybe, but sometimes I just leave it on 2.5 and everything's fine. But for the top stitching, I like a stitch length of 3. That's not like any rule or anything. I just like how top stitching looks when it's a tiny bit bigger. And then I'll also address thread, because that's a question I get a lot too. I only recently started using some cotton thread for my quilting because I really love how it looks as top stitching. It's a tiny bit thicker than the all-purpose thread, although I quilted for years with just the all-purpose regular thread. The benefit to using cotton is its longevity. Like, I have this quilt my mom made for me when I was a young teenager, and she was just using all-purpose polyester thread, you know? And now, the thing about polyester thread is that it's plastic, and so it does rub on the cotton fibers of the piecing, and it starts to create like tears. And in that quilt, I can see that the thread has broken down the fabric. Whereas with cotton thread, you won't have that problem. So switching to cotton thread is a good idea. I really love the essential thread from Connecting Threads. They sent me some to try and I absolutely loved it, so I bought a bunch more. And for this quilt, I used 4 different colors of it. I hope you can see. I'll take like a close-up video, but I think the little intersections look very cute with the intersecting colors. So that's fun, and also it adds some interest to the back too. So those are the most basic questions. Let's move on to some of the other ones. I think you'll find a theme of this video is that there's more than one way to do pretty much everything in quilting, and you can do what you want. Don't let the quilt police tell you that you should do this or you should do that or you shouldn't use this or that, okay? Just if you like it and it's accessible to you, you do it. Okay, next question. When you're machine quilting, do you do all your sewing in one direction or do you switch? For example, do you start always on the right and sew to the left, or do you sew to the right on one and to the left on the other? I think she's asking which direction do you do the quilt? By quilting, I'm talking about the top stitching part. So you have made the quilt sandwich. And by the way, I have a whole playlist about quilting, and I'm gonna make a new playlist about just the basic skills about the quilting process. So making the sandwich, quilting it, and adding the binding. So you can find all three of those basic things. But she's asking, when you're quilting a large quilt like this, which way do you start? So I always start in the middle. So I roll it up. You'll see in the video about the quilting on your regular sewing machine. I roll it up, I sew straight lines. Let me show you on a piece of paper. Here's your quilt. I roll these edges like so, like a scroll. I start in the middle, and then I move out towards this direction while continuing to roll this side until I'm at the end. Then I flip it and I start next to my starting point and I go this direction. So for all of the lines that go this way, I do this half and then I do this half. And then if I'm like on this quilt, I'm doing the lines this way too. I do the same. I start in the middle and move to the right, and then flip it, start in the middle and move to the right. The benefit of this is that you never have the entire quilt trying to cram under the arm of your sewing machine. And you won't get as many bubbles. Like sometimes you work inwards and inwards in the same direction the whole time, and your quilt can start to kind of get wonky, or you can get some tucks in the backing, things like that. So if you pinned properly, it should be okay either way. But it makes the most sense to start in the middle and work toward the edges. Okay, somebody asked about my design wall. Right now it only has 2 blocks on it, but I do arrange large quilt projects up there also. I have a video about it with a caveat. So it is made out of felt soundproofing squares, and they are stuck to the wall with those 3M squares. And I've never had them come off. The video though shows my husband making like a giant duct tape grid basically on the back, and then putting the squares on the duct tape to put on the wall. That did not work. The duct tape did not stick. So we removed that and I just stuck them directly onto the wall. It will create wall damage when we remove it. So my dad built one of these for my mom, and what he did was he purchased pegboard and he stuck the felt squares to the pegboard. So the pegboard is screwed into the wall, but they won't have the sticky squares directly on the wall to remove and repair drywall. So the downside is that I do have to use pins. The upside is that it is prettier than just using like a piece of flannel or something, or batting. Sometimes that can get, kind of roughed up and not look very attractive. I like the gray color. Now I think there is an actual product made just for this, and those are what I'll probably use next time when we move, which I will talk about at the end. Some people asked if we're still moving. Let me talk about that at the end. Okay, someone has a burning question about sashing. Sometimes the selvages aren't lined up correctly on the bolt. Plus, when you fold the fold up to the selvages, the width of fabric you cut has zigzaggy sections. So she's talking about when you're cutting, rotary cutting strips. And in order to cut sashing, which you need long lengths, you need the whole width of the fabric. So basically you fold it in half and fold it in half again, selvage to selvage, and then you're cutting strips. And if this has happened to you, it's happened to me, then you'll understand what she means by zigzaggy lines. So you cut a strip, you open it up, and it's not straight across, it's like this. Probably more subtle than that. So there are ways to avoid that. She asked if that's why I tear it first. And when I was making the sashing for this quilt in that last video about it, that's what she's referring to when I tore the fabric to get a straight line. That is a good method to get the grain line correct. And she's right. Sometimes once you have that grain line set, the selvages are not matched. So sometimes it is just made crooked. And you can do things like pull diagonally to make the grain line straight, or you can just sort of use that straight edge that you created by tearing it. She asked if tearing it makes it stretched out. And in my experience, it does not, maybe the tiniest bit, but you can steam it back into shape, no problem. So yes, you need to start with a very straight edge. And when you're cutting strips and you have your ruler, so there's a grid on your ruler and there's a grid on your mat. You kind of want to pick one or the other. So am I going to use the lines on my mat, or am I going to use the lines on my ruler? So when you line that straight edge up on your mat, then you want to use your ruler to cut consecutive straight lines. But rather than just lining up your vertical straight edge, you want to make sure that the bottom of your fabric, the folded part, is also straight using these lines on your ruler. And sometimes you can cut a bunch of lines and then it barely starts to get wonky. So what you want to do is re-straighten. Every several cuts, you'll need to re-straighten the line. So check and see after every third or fourth strip, make sure you're still straight and re-straighten the edge if you need to. And that should solve your zigzaggy lines problem. Okay, next one is, how do you sew without getting a backache? I love this question because I actually do have mild scoliosis and I do deal with back pain and just body pain in general from other things. But she said she's tried a lot of different things, ergonomic things in different positions, and she still gets an icky back. The key to back pain is what you're doing outside of the sewing room, not inside. So for me, I really have to work on my posture muscles, and I have to work on my general strength in my back, regardless of how much I'm sewing, or else I do get backaches. And sometimes when it happens while I'm sewing, I go and use my foam roller and I roll out my back. Sometimes also a hanging bar can work if you have a pull-up bar. My chiropractor gave me this tip. Just get a pull-up bar and just hang from it. It really, really helps your postural muscles. So also working with like an exercise band to strengthen your posture can help so much as well. Pilates, things like that. So I hate to say it, but exercise is key for avoiding pain. Also, you've probably noticed I sew on a stool. I am an edge of my seat sitter. I think it's because I played the saxophone in school and you really have to like perch on the edge of your seat in order to play that instrument. So I got used to sitting this way and it really does help. So if you're like sinking back in your seat all the time and trying to sew that way, or if you're hunching over like this, if you're trying to be like super comfy, like you're sitting and watching TV, that might be contributing to back pain too. Try switching to a stool or an exercise ball and see if that gives you any better posture that can help avoid pain. Not a doctor. Take all this with a grain of salt. There are several questions about free motion quilting. One of them says, even after I get the right needle, thread correctly, put the feed dogs down, the stitching is not even. Free motion quilting is challenging to get all the stitches even. It takes some practice, but I have a great tip that I just learned last year or the last 2 years. So first, it takes practice. It just really does. But the second thing I learned that really helped me a lot is to use the speed control on my sewing machine. The reason your stitches are coming out too small or too big is because your machine is sewing faster than you're moving the quilt, or vice versa. So the speed control on the sewing machine, if I put it to a medium speed, then even if I'm pedal to the metal, it keeps the stitches slow enough for me to keep up with them. It can't just like run away and get like all those stitches in a row. And I find it just much easier to get into the rhythm and flow because I can put the pedal all the way down knowing that the speed is going to be consistent. And then also quilting gloves can help a lot because it helps you move the quilt around evenly. Quilting gloves, let me show you mine. Mine are Fawns and Porter. They have stickies, like little grippies like those socks have. And they really kind of save your hands too. So if you have pain in your hands while quilting, this will help with that too. It helps you grip the quilt and help you move it without you having to grab it or like push it and pull it. And then also make sure that the weight of your quilt is not dragging it around. So it's not like falling off the back of your table or falling towards you on your lap, because that can create a lot of like heavy dragging. And then the machine, since your feed dogs are down, it's not guiding, it can't like grab the quilt. You have to do it yourself. So if there's weight on one side or the other, that's not helpful either. Okay, another person about free motion quilting asked if the stitch length has to be at 0. She said a lot of instructors tell you to set the stitch length to 0. I have never done that. I'm sure there's some reason why you should, but since your feed dogs are down and the stitch length controls the feed dogs, then I'm having a hard time imagining why it would matter. But if I'm wrong, somebody can correct me in the comments. And then the other question about free motion quilting is, like I just addressed in which direction you sew straight lines, but where do you start? So when you're deciding how to free motion quilt, where do you start since you're not just doing straight lines? So you want to think of your quilt in sort of like sections. So if it's a rectangular quilt like this, you would want to sort of mentally divide it into probably thirds this way and then halves this way. So now I have 6 sections. I keep wanting to call them quadrants, but there's 6, so they're not. And I would start here, and you would meander your way all around here until you have this section covered, and then you would move into this section and sort of blend it into your meanderings up here and do this one, and then you would move on and so on. So that makes it a little bit less overwhelming when you're just dealing with sections at a time. You can make the sections smaller if you want. Sometimes free motion quilting, like I did on my fish and forest quilt, it was in rows. So I was doing free motion loops in rows. And so I did the same as I would with straight lines. I started in the middle, made all my free motion loops in one direction, and then did the other direction. There's also like this mini quilt. You can see that I free motioned big zigzags and small zigzags in different parts of the quilt. Even here, I would probably start in the center if this were big. Since it's small, it doesn't matter quite so much. And then I did the border last. So just think of it in smaller pieces and that will help you decide where to start. Okay, last one about free motion quilting was, can you use rulers with free motion on a regular machine? So she's talking about, you've probably seen long arm videos of people long arm quilting, those giant big long arm machines, and they have like templates that they're stitching around. I know that I've seen people do that with regular machines. I think it's probably an advanced skill, but that it can be done. I've never done it, so this is something that I don't really know very much about. I'm sure you can look that up on YouTube and try it if you want to. Oh, somebody else asked, how do you decide how you're going to quilt your quilt top once you finish it? Hand quilting versus machine quilting. How do you decide the quilt pattern, especially when you make it wonky? This is something I've addressed. In a recent video, I gave you a tour of a ton of my quilts here at my house, and I talked about how I decided to quilt each one. I thought it was really fun to go through with like specific individual quilt designs and how I came to the conclusion on how to quilt it. But my short answer is that you just sort of let the quilt tell you. And sometimes it's okay to do what's easiest. And this transitions into the next one of the other questions I got about this. It's a very long comment, so I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but this person basically has over 100 quilt tops that need to be made into actual quilts. So clearly she loves making the tops, not so much the quilting. If I were in this position and I had a backlog of quilts, I would straight line quilt them as basically as I could get away with and still really like how it looked. She also said she likes flowy quilts and doesn't like dense quilting anyway. So if I were her, I would just pick one and straight line quilt that thing. And maybe make it a goal to do like 2 or 3 a month. Because the quilting, we think it takes forever, but I did this entire thing. I made the quilt sandwich and did all of the quilting over the weekend. So Saturday, I finished the last bit on Sunday and then attached the binding also the same day. So I think in our minds, we build this up to being a monumental task that it's not actually. Obviously, if you're gonna hand quilt 100 quilts, that would feel very daunting and I would be avoiding that also. Okay, moving on. Speaking of annoying to run out of bobbin in the middle of sewing the rows, that is annoying. Can you address bobbins? Am I missing something? I have a big thread spool holder, but bobbins are still these tiny little nuggets of thread that I can't see until I'm well down the seam and realize I've run out. Can we get a machine that has a bobbin alarm? Actually, yes, you can. I sewed on my mom's 90s faff for a few years, and it actually has a little light that blinks when your bobbin is low. And so those do exist. I don't think I wish they would. And I also wish they would start working on a solution for the small bobbin thing. I will say that those old metal bobbins hold a ton more than these new plastic ones. But my one tip, I guess, is to wind multiple bobbins. So when I was quilting this, I knew that I needed 2 bobbins of each color. So I started with the purple, I wound 2 purple bobbins, and that way when I ran out, I could just pop the next one in, because it really can be like a disruptor to progress if you're like, I have to wind another bobbin. So that's my one tip. Otherwise, I'm sorry, there's not really a solution for the small bobbins. Okay, this person says, I love your channel. Thank you, I love you too. Can you please share tips for cutting straight with the rotary cutter? I often either ride the top edge of the ruler with the blade or veer slightly off course away from the guide or push against the guide too hard and shift it out of place. You make it look effortless. I have 3 things to help. 1, always have a sharp blade in your rotary cutter. Having a sharp blade means you don't have to push down nearly as hard. I order them in like 12 packs. If you're getting those ones from the store, I don't know why the heck they cost so much at the store when you can get a 12 pack for like $11 online, either from Wawak or Amazon. So as soon as you notice you're having to push harder or it's having gaps in your cuts, replace the blade. You'll wonder why you didn't sooner. Do it sooner. The second is I have these little stickies on my rulers called Sure Grips, I think. You can get them at Hobby Lobby, you can get them online, anywhere. And these really help you not have to hold the ruler in place so hard with your other hand. If you still have trouble, so this is the first thing I would try. If you still have trouble, you can get one of those big handles that suction cups onto your ruler. I know Caterpillar has them, or you can probably get them other places, I'm not sure. But I'll link to the Caterpillar ones because I have a discount code. So I'll put a link to that down there. So that can help you also to keep the ruler in place. Okay, let's talk about batting. Some hints as to the best. Oh, she wants some hints as to the best for baby quilts or adult quilts or wall hangings or jackets and some of the crafts. Which shows off the quilting more, which shrinks more, and how do they look after a couple washings? I know some of this is just personal preference, but would love your opinion. My opinion is I never use polyester batting. I always use cotton, or I've used a wool blend batting. Usually the cotton has a tiny bit of poly in it, and that's fine, like 80-20 or whatever. But my favorite is still the Warm and Natural. I think it's nice. It's a nice weight. The wool I have used a few times is warmer, I will say. This last time, my store was out and I had to order it online, and I ordered something, it's 100% cotton for this one. And it's from an Amish company. I'll link you to it because it was really nice to work with. It was fuzzier than most, but it actually does seem like full cotton. It was 100% cotton. And it's really nice. It's kind of a lightweight one. It was thinner to work with. It had a nice scrim on it. But quilts are supposed to be shrinky and shrivelly and cozy like that. Like when you wash and dry it, it turns out that crinkly feeling. And if you don't like that, then I guess you can use polyester batting. But polyester is plastic, to remind you, and it's gonna be sweatier. So my favorite is Warm and Natural. That's what I buy at Hobby Lobby, and that's what I buy online when I can find it. This person has a polyester blend quilt top. If you have ever inherited something from the 60s or 70s, it likely has a lot of polyester double knit. She said she bought a beautiful twin patchwork unfinished quilt top, wants to use it for projects instead of bedding. That's a great idea. The colors are so pretty and happy, so I want to make sure I make the most of it. I thought of a vest, bag. Any other ideas? I think that you all will have some ideas for this. So put your best ideas in the comments. Definitely, I would not use it for anything kitchen-y like that might melt it. So don't make pot holders or something like that. But I think bags, and I think your vest idea is a great one. Maybe putting some of it onto a denim jacket, things like that. I've seen people make like Christmas stockings out of them. Gosh, you can make so many things. I'm gonna address this non-quilt quilt project question in just a sec too, so maybe that will also spark some ideas. Okay, moving on. Would love your suggestions on quilting designs when using solid fabric. I would love to make a modern quilt top, but since my lines are not the straightest, I worry the design would look terrible. Okay. Here's your pep talk, my monthly Pin Cut Sew pep talk about perfectionism. If you are avoiding making something because you're worried it's not going to be perfect, you're never going to make it. So I just want to tell you that no quilt is perfect because it's made by human hands. So this quilt, even though I tried so hard to get the rows lined up, you can see a good example of this right here. This should be straight in line, and it's just not. This sashing is slightly over to that way. Which way is that? To your right compared to this line. And so when I was quilting, some of these lines are wavy, but can you even tell? And once I wash this quilt up, all of those little imperfections disappear anyway because the quilt like perfectly crinkles around the threads. And nobody is going to be inspecting this quilt looking to see if any of my lines are wavy. Here's a spot right here. Tiny bit wavy. Some of them are pretty bad. And look, now even I can't find them. When I was sewing them, I'm like, ooh, that one went a little off. But now that I'm looking at it, I don't even see them. But yeah, like this. It's not perfectly straight. So I have made a quilt out of solid fabrics. It's the mid-century quilt. I know I bring it up all the time, and I quilted that with contrasting thread. It looks so cool. That quilting on there looks cool. So you know what? If you like it, just do it. Don't worry about it looking perfect. The washing and drying hides a multitude of sins. I promise you. Ooh, I really like this next question. She says, I know sometimes you tell us where you get fabric, but I'd like to know how much you tend to get. Fat quarters, yards, remnants. When I go to my fabric store, I do often buy fat quarters. I love fat quarters because you can get a nice little piece of fabric without spending very much money. But when you order online, usually it has to be half yard or more. For quilting, I almost always get half yard unless it's something I have a plan for. So if I'm ordering it for backing or binding, I'll get more. So backing, I would get 4 yards. Binding, I would get a full yard. If I have a specific need that I don't need very much for, I go on Etsy and I look for scrap packs. So you might remember when I was working on my neighborhood quilt, the house quilt, I needed some low volume pieces, and I needed pieces with like little animals or like characters or something to go in the windows. So I ordered scraps on Etsy and they were perfect. And I didn't end up with a ton of leftover yardage because I only needed the smallest pieces. So that's my answer to that question. In general, I get a half a yard. Oh, also another reason I would get more is for a background fabric. So I'm making a quilt like this. Denim here is the background fabric. So I would get a few yards to be safe unless I was using a pattern and I knew exactly how much. Even then I mess up, so I always get more. Okay, do you have any tips on where and how to store a project while you are hand quilting it? I mostly quilt in the evenings while watching TV, but during the day the quilt keeps getting in the way. Yes, I sometimes use like a basket. I think the key here is to just discipline yourself to fold it up and put it in the basket at the end of your TV watching time so that it's not in your way in the day. Okay, here's a question about getting a new sewing machine. After years and years of having a Singer HD, she's looking for something different. Wants to keep it under a few $1,000s. What are your recommendations for sewing quilting machine? I currently use a Janome. I had about a $1,400 budget. This is the most pricey machine I've ever had. For many years, I used an old Pfaff from the 70s, and then I used my mom's hand-me-down 90s Pfaff. When I taught sewing, I used very inexpensive Brothers. My best sewing machine advice is never to buy the cheapest of any brand. So if you only have a $100 budget, do not go buy that Singer Heavy Duty or $100 sewing machine from the store. Instead, go on Facebook Marketplace and get an older used machine, and it will be, even if it's older, like 90s, 70s even, it will be way better than any $100, $200 machine you can buy at Walmart. I promise, hands down. If you have a larger budget, I love my Janome. If you have an even larger budget, people really, really love Bernina. Bernina is like the Rolls Royce. I will say though, with the more expensive your machine, the more expensive the parts are going to be. So I just ordered an invisible zipper foot for this, which for my inexpensive student Brother machines would cost like $7. This one costs $40. So just know that the accessories are going to be more expensive. A couple $1,000s is a really nice budget. So maybe go into your local quilt store and try some out. But mine's a Janome Memory Craft and I'm very happy with it. Love it. Also, when you go there to your quilt store, if you are not into embroidery, don't let them talk you into an embroidery machine. You'll just spend more money and never use the features, unless of course you love that and want to try it. It's just my caveat. I think they always try to sell you the embroidery machines. Okay, this person says how or even if to pre-wash jelly rolls. I usually end up steaming them and hoping they shrink some. And do they actually shrink? I think so, but hard to tell. I also steam iron quilt as you go, batting blocks beforehand in hopes of shrinking those. Okay. So I just said that part of the magic of quilting is that shrinkage you get when you wash it. So no, I would definitely not pre-wash jelly rolls. They'll just end up in a very tangled mess unless you finish off the edges, and even then they're probably all gonna like knot together in the wash. So I would not pre-wash them. A lot of quilters don't pre-wash any yardage at all. I usually do because I don't like that shiny feel they always have. But Sometimes with smaller pieces, I still don't. I even use unwashed pieces with washed pieces. I have never had a problem. So this is one of those don't overthink it type of things. Nothing in your quilt is going to shrink so much that you're going to have raw edges coming out. It's just not going to happen. Everything on the quilt will shrink up in the wash, and that's what gives it that lovely crinkly finish. One person said, how can I make binding easier? I have seen special rulers and tools, but I'm not sure if they'll help. I have the hardest time joining the ends. It seems like it's too big or too small, and I often end up just tucking one end inside the other, which isn't ideal. I have a great video on binding. It's a very simple method, and at the end, I do tuck one end into the other, but it's like on a diagonal. So I will link you to that video. If you're a perfectionist and cannot handle that tucked in binding, let me just show you. Okay, I haven't hand stitched this down yet, but once I do, you cannot even tell that this is not a full join. You can slip stitch it closed if you want by hand, but this is what my finished binding ends look like when one is tucked inside the other. But I will link to my binding method. Hopefully you'll find it makes everything a little bit easier. There are really mathy and complicated ways of making the binding like perfect, and I don't know, that's too much math for me. Another person about binding said she saw on a different post where the envelope method was used for binding a quilt. What exactly is that? That is when the quilt backing is made a certain amount larger than the quilt top and batting, and then it is simply folded over and stitched in place from the front. That is a perfectly great and valid method. I've never done it, but I know there are some great videos. I know my mom did it with some of her earlier quilts in the 90s, and I remember looking at it as a teenager. I'm like, how did she do that? So there is a way to do that. It's a machine method, so it does save time. It saves fabric because you don't have to have an extra binding fabric either. Your backing fabric becomes your binding. That's what that method is. Okay, this person said she has trouble with the pinning. I have a video where I table basted a quilt, so that's how I do my quilts. I baste them with pins on my table so I don't have to get on the floor. And she was saying she has a really hard time with quilting it. She is using a walking foot. I asked that question in the comments, and she is. Do you ever get ripples and wrinkles on your backing? I think she's saying the more she quilts, she gets wrinkles and like tucks in the backing fabric, which is not what you want. So I have a few ideas. Some of the commenters said to try the quilt as you go method, and that's a great idea. Some people really, really love quilt as you go. I've never tried it, but there are some whole channels just based on that method. So that might be a good thing for her to try. So my ideas are to try basting spray. I've never used basting spray. Some people really swear by it. So everything is just flat and in place from the get-go. My other tip is to check the back often. So every few rows, just lift up your quilt and check, because it's a lot easier to unsew a small section than unsewing a large section if your tuck in your back continues. And if you find the backing has a big bubble that's coming, it's okay to stop and repin, smooth it all out and repin. I've had to do that before. And then my other tips that I said about the free motion stitch lengths, use the gloves, and also don't let the weight of the quilt pull it around. You need to be guiding it. It needs to be totally loose on your lap so that it's not pulling and dragging. Those are my tips. Okay, a few questions left. Then I'll talk about if I'm moving. If I have a sewing machine with an overlock stitch, should I also invest in a serger? Getting to make a tamarack jacket, and I do make some bags, but mostly quilts and pillowcases and pot holders. I would say a serger is totally unnecessary. I sewed even clothing for years without one. There are things you can do to sew on knits without a serger. I think at the point when you're sewing a lot of garments and you're sewing a lot of knit fabrics for garments, that's when you might want to invest in a serger. If you're just sewing a garment here and there, you don't need one, especially if you're sewing mostly quilts and crafts and just like she's making a jacket. So you can finish the insides of your jacket without one just fine in so many different methods. Somebody also asked how to sew knits without a serger, and I think I need to make a separate video about that. There are plenty of things that you can do. I need to make a separate video about that. It's too big of a topic. This person is asking about how to do strip quilts without swanky rulers. Oh, here's the question about how to sew stretch fabric with no overlocker, just a straight stitch. Oh, because she has a vintage machine. If you are sewing knits and all you have is a straight stitch, just sew 2 lines of straight stitching instead of 1. That is the best thing you can do. What can you quilt that's, and then the second part of our question, what can you quilt that's useful, that's not a blanket or bag or pot holder? I'm looking for ideas to help my ADHD stay motivated, like quick wins or small components. Please and thank you. Okay, this is one of 2 questions I received about ADHD. So let me talk about the first part first. How to do strip quilts without swanky rulers. I have the most basic rulers. I have this long one. I have a short one that's about like this, and I have a square. If you have to pick one, get this one. This is 24 by 5. I know you see so many videos and content on Instagram with all of these fancy quilting rulers. You absolutely do not need them. Not even that strip cutting one. I know some people love them. So if you're doing strip quilts constantly, might be worth investing in. It might also help you not get the zigzag effect. Otherwise, I think what I answered about not getting the zigzag, I think that will help you with the strip quilting cutting. Now let's talk about the ADHD factor. I empathize. So if you have ADHD, basically your mind is always wanting newness. You are chasing novelty. So it is a good question about quilt projects that are not big quilts. I have a whole video and huge blog post with tons of ideas for quilt projects that aren't actually big quilts. If you do want to make quilts, this is why I make so many improv quilts, because with improv, the project is always changing and it's always a creative problem solving process. So if you do want to make a large quilt, try an improv medallion quilt. And this is why it's perfect for somebody with ADHD. You make the center part and then you get to think of the next border. Then you get to think of the next border, and then you get to think of the next one. And if you're tired of making this border, switch to something else on this border. So the reason I think I love improv quilting so much is that it's always changing. And then for the quilting part, I think part of what can keep you motivated to actually finish, I couldn't find the other question about ADHD, but I know it was about actually finishing the thing. I think envisioning the end result in the hands of the recipient can be a big motivator. Imagining this perfect quilt on that couch that you made it to go on can help you push to the finish. Imagining what your sister will say when she sees this amazing thing you made can help you finish. And this is, I think, also the beauty of social media, especially in the sewing and quilting realm. I know there's so much wrong with social media. And check my camera battery. Oh, it's fine. Gosh, I feel like I've been rambling on for a long time, so I'm almost done though. So what was I saying? Is this an ADHD moment? Oh, social media. Yes. Okay. So the quilting and sewing community on social media is so nice. They are supportive. They are positive. Ideas are sparking ideas from everyone else's content. And being able to share what you have just produced and receive like commentary on it from your peers and community is not a vain thing. It's a community thing. And we were made for community. So for you to be able to share things online can also motivate your brain to get it finished. Even sharing progress of it and receiving people's cheering you on comments can go a long way in helping motivate you to finish. But yeah, so those are my tips. Envision the final product, work on quilts or projects that are changing up constantly, and envision the final result and in whatever way that helps you finish. So that's all I'll say. The last question is about hanging small quilts, and I think I need to make a little video on this. It's very simple. I fold a square of fabric in half diagonally and I stitch it right into the binding on the 2 top edges. So I baste it onto the back and then I just bind over it. And that's how I hang these small quilts, and I stick a wooden dowel in there and I hang it on the wall with push pins. Okay, phew. That was a lot of really great questions. I hope it's been helpful though. So some people asked if I'm still moving. Yes, so we are under contract on this house. We are just not counting our chickens before they are hatched because, we still have to go through, it's a contingent offer on them selling their house. The inspection process is coming. So we are probably still moving unless everything falls apart. I really, really am looking forward to a larger sewing room. I know that not everybody has a sewing room at all. And so I am very, very grateful. But I am also running a business in here, and my business has taken over the dining room, you know, with products and shipping, and there is a place for everything and it's all put away. But I really, and then like I'm working on this quilt, but also I need to cut out this other project. And yeah, I have done some amazing work in this teeny tiny room, but I am really excited to potentially have a larger space. So the answer is we are still planning to move, but it also could still all fall apart and we stay. So I hope you have enjoyed this. If you have any other questions, or if you want to help answer any of those questions I already tried to answer, drop those thoughts in the comments and I will see y'all soon. Bye.